G'day guys. Day for it, really is. So welcome back to another episode. We are off grid again. Today, this time on the beautiful Dampier Peninsula at a place called Middle Lagoon, which is on Indigenous land. It's probably about 100 kilometres north of Broome. Being off grid, it's sort of made me think again, as I always do, about using our 12 volt and how to make sure that we optimise the power of the sun and make sure we keep our battery as high as possible. In about 3 or 4 days time, we're about to shoot off to the Gibb River Road, and we're going to be completely reliant on our battery for about 16-17 days, maybe longer if something goes wrong, but let's hope nothing goes wrong. So I think it's important when you're talking about 12 volt, I guess just to familiarise you guys with what our 12 volt system looks like, because let's be honest, all 12 volt systems are a little bit different. Then I'm going to run through some hot tips on how to get the most efficiency and optimize your not only your 12 volt and your battery charge, but also just make sure that you can relax while you're at camp, have a couple of beers and not sit there stressing about your battery power. So let's get straight into it. Our van, you've probably seen other videos on our van, it's our little Jawa, and we spent as much money as we possibly could on one, the size of the battery, and we went for a lithium battery. I just believe that lithium batteries, one, discharge much lower, down to about 15 to 20%, and they also charge much more quickly. The other thing that we've also invested money in, other than the 400 watts of roof mounted solar panels, is making sure that we've got a decent quality 200 watt soft solar blanket, and I'll show you a little bit later in the video how we use that. To talk through our battery storage, we've got a 340 amp hour giant battery, which is pretty big on the lithium battery side of things. Many people go for 100 to 200 amp hours of lithium power. We've opted to go as big as we can for the 340. We just find that starting off with as much power as possible is a really good way to enjoy your time off grid. We've also got a 40 amp DC to DC charger. It's Enerdrive as well. We've got a 2000 watt Smart Pass Enerdrive inverter, and we've got an Enerdrive e-Power battery charger. So we've also included in our van is Enerdrive, which is one of the more popular and well-known brands in terms of our charger, our inverter, our DC-DC, and obviously our giant battery as well. So just to familiarise yourself with our setup, I mentioned a little bit before that we've got 400 watts of power or solar panels sitting on the roof, and the other way, so there's 3 ways that our battery will take charge with that e-Power Enerdrive charger. So number 1 is a 240 volt. Obviously when you're plugged into 240 volt, you want to make sure that other than running your appliances, your battery is also charging. Number 2, we've got the solar input, so we've got the 400 watts on the roof, and we've also got an Anderson plug on the rear where we plug our 200 watt soft panel in to really give our batteries a bump. In particular, when with the roof mounted panels, they're 100% flat, so it means that there's probably only about 4 to 5 hours in good conditions of optimal solar coverage per day. The beauty of the soft panel, and I'll show you again in a second, is that you can move that around to capture the sun from basically as soon as the sun breaks through the clouds and comes over the mountains in the morning, and move it around through the day to actually maximize that as well. The other way that we charge our batteries when we're off grid as well is that we've got an Anderson plug on the back of the car which feeds into the battery via the car alternator, and I'll step through that in a bit more detail. So the 3 ways to get power in. So let's run through my 5 or 6 hot tips on how to maximize your efficiency and get the most enjoyment and the least amount of stress out of your off-grid camping and your 12 volt and battery setup. So number 1, understand your usage in terms of how many amp hours you're going to use in differing conditions. So just to give you a basic rundown of how we use our battery when we're off grid, we run our Sirocco fans in summer in particular. We've got the Sirocco fans running right now. It's about 35, 36 degrees here at Middle Lagoon, so it's pretty hot. We've got a nice breeze coming in, but we want the air circulating in the van. These draw not much power, but they're a really nice luxury to have when you can't have your air conditioning running and you're off your 240 volts. We also run a 96 litre Evercool fridge freezer, and we run the smaller side of the Evercool where the compressor's built in as a freezer. I usually run it at around -14, -15 degrees. We run the larger side of the fridge at about 2 degrees. So just to keep our food really cool. And when you're off grid for extended period times like us, it's incredibly important to make sure that your fridge is running efficiently and keeping your food nice and cool. As I sort of said, we do 16, 17 days at a time, and you want to make sure that you're going to get to the end of your trip and still have fresh food. So understanding how much you're using is really, really important. In terms of the 240 volt appliances, we very rarely use our inverter. We use it once or twice a day to froth our milk for our coffee. We have a little Breville milk frother that we use just at the front of the van here. That just makes a beautiful little flat white, but we actually don't carry a coffee machine. The other thing that we carry with us, it's 240 volts, is simply a toaster. So we don't have a heap of 240 volt appliances. Mabo goes without a hairdryer, she goes without a hair straightener, she goes without a curling iron. She's still beautiful too. At least I'm still happy to keep her around. But we don't use a great deal of 240 volt appliances. So just to give you a rundown of what we use though, from about sundown, or from when the battery stops getting feed from the solar, which at this time of year is about 4:35 p.m. in the afternoon, and until it actually starts to take power again, we generally, this really depends on how hot it is through the day and how hot it is through the night, because obviously your fridge is going to work an awful lot harder when it's warmer at night, and warmer through the day for that matter. But we use about 20% of our battery. So I said before that we have a 340 amp hour battery. It's under here, by the way, which is why I keep tapping the bed. We use about 20% overnight when the solar isn't feeding our battery. Now that says to me, in that 12, 13 hours or so, 10% of our battery is 34 amps. So we're using 20% overnight. So we use about 65 to 75 amp hours on a regular overnight run. Divide that by 12 and you're still using about 7 or 8 amp hours. So needing to understand that usage is really important, because you need to know how long it's going to take depending on how much solar you've got coming in through the day, varying conditions overhead and those sorts of things. You're still going to be running your appliances through the day. So we're probably using about 125 to 150 amp hours per day. So to keep topping your batteries up, you're going to need to produce a lot more energy than that. So point number one, make sure that you understand your usage. Point number two, carry a 200 watt if you can afford it. Make sure you get a good quality one, a 200 watt soft panel with you. It's a great investment, and we use our 200 watt soft panel for two things. Number one, we've got a rear input Anderson plug which bumps out our solar from 400 watts on the roof to 600 watts when we attach the 200 watt panel on the back. And as I sort of mentioned before, you can move that panel around through the day. When I'm not using it, or when the battery's quite full, like I have done today, we got to about 95% by about midday back into our battery. I've connected it to the fridge on the car. So we've also got a fridge in the car. It's a 70 litre. We only run it at both zones as a fridge at 0 degrees because I like my beer nice and cold. But when you're not driving around, I do have a separate DC-DC charger, a Red Arc 25 amp DC-DC charger in the back of the ute. But if you're not driving through the day and you haven't got a roof mounted solar panel on your car, your battery's not getting any charge and your fridge compressor's running all the time. So I actually swap the soft panel from the back of the van when I really need to bump the van battery onto a regulator into the van battery, into the car battery. And I've only got a 120 amp hour AGM battery sitting under the tub of the ute. I'll go out. So here's our rear Anderson input plug. As I was mentioning before, this Anderson plug is available at the back of the van, and it makes it really easy to bump the soft panel into. Now, because of the EnerDrive setup that I've got inside the van, I actually don't need a regulator when I plug in my external panel. So yeah, that's really important. If you've got the setup that we've got, you don't want another regulator attached to it. So when you buy a soft panel like mine, make sure that you get one with a regulator that you can build in line if you do need a regulator, because I do use it when I'm charging the fridge battery, or that you can take the regulator out so that you can attach your soft panel straight into the back of your Anderson plug on the van. Here is our soft panel. So it is a 200 watt Rough Country, which is Autobahn's generic brand. It's not the most expensive panel on the market, but it's a decent quality panel. It's got a decent quality lead, and I find that it works really efficiently, actually more efficient than the hard panels on the van. But again, it's because I can move it and position it. Now with my lead, as I sort of said, I've already got the battery up quite high. Maybe I nearly tripped over a bucket of water then. So I've got the battery quite high, so I'm going to now bump my fridge battery. So I'll show you what I do with this. I plug the solar panel into my regulator, because this setup here is going directly from the butterfly clips into the battery. So you need a regulator to protect your battery from surges, and there is that Red Arc BCDC charger that I mentioned a little bit earlier, which also charges my fridge battery when the car is running. So I hope that makes sense. That regulator clicks out through this Anderson plug here, clicks out here, so if I did want to run an unregulated feed into a different battery, I can, which is what I do with the van, or where I need the regulator for the car battery, I do it that way. So let's jump back into the van. So tip number 3, and this one's pretty basic, but a lot of people forget this, or a lot of people maybe don't feel confident getting up to do this, but make sure your roof mounted solar panels are clean. I clean our roof mounted solar panels every time we are off grid. And generally what I do is, before we pop the hatch or pop the pop top on our particular van, when we pull up at camp where we're going to be off grid, I grab a damp microfiber cloth and a dry microfiber cloth, and I jump up on the roof. Be very careful where you step on your roof, and then just make sure I give the solar panels a really good wipe. I know that sounds basic. Damp first, wipe any residue off with the dry panel, but it makes a huge difference in your input feed when you've got clean solar panels. So I know that one sounds really basic, guys, but a lot of people forget it, or a lot of people don't feel confident. If you're taller, I'm not that tall, you could probably use a 2 or 3 step and actually get up on the side of the van when the roof is down and actually give it a wipe from the side of the roof if you don't feel confident jumping up and walking on your roof. So point number 4, give up as many 240 volt appliances as possible. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, Movo's had to give up on a hairdryer, hair straightener, a curling wand. What else did you give up on? Coffee machine we were going to have. We don't have a microwave in the van, and I think it's a bit of a myth. People think that they've invested money in good quality lithium batteries and have solar on their roof, and you automatically assume that you can just use 240 volt appliances like you do when you're plugged into the 240 volts or when you're at home. The sad thing is, guys, that's not the case. If you want to keep your battery in optimal condition, you know, up around that 90 to 100% mark, you're only going to be able, even in really good solar conditions, you cannot be using 240 volt appliances all the time. I know that might sound hard for some people to sort of accept, but you're camping, and as good as the technology with lithium batteries and charging and that sort of thing have gone, if you're using your microwave in particular all the time, if you're using, you know, hydro appliances, unfortunately, you're only going to last 2 or 3 days off grid without your battery going into shutdown mode to protect itself, even in good solar conditions. We've been camping with friends over this trip, and some of those friends have actually found that their battery is significantly lower than they expected it to be, and generally that comes down to either a lack of solar or the use of a lot of 240 volt appliances. So make sure you're trying to cut out or minimize, because if you're going to go spend the money on having an inverter and that sort of thing, obviously you're going to want to use 240 volt appliances, but don't go crazy. Can't reiterate that enough. All right, point number 5, and this goes hand in hand with the 240 volt appliances. only switch your inverter on. We've got a nice little soft touch switch for our inverter, but only leave that inverter on when you're using your 240 volt appliances. When you're running in standby mode here, this inverter is still going to draw a few amps per hour, so that will not only cut down, draw your battery down, but it'll also impact the number of amps you can get in through the day when your solar panels are working. So make sure that you've got your inverter switched off. It is easy some of the time when you're fluffing around and busy doing things to forget to turn that off, but it is a really, it's a good tip to optimize the efficiency of your 12 volt. And point number 6, guys, is when you're using lithium batteries in particular, I'll put a screenshot into the video here, but make sure you are using your BMS app on your battery management system app on your smartphone to get an accurate reading of where your battery state of charge, or SOC, actually is. We've got a control panel in our Jawa which was actually designed for the AGM batteries that come standard, and quite often if you're not drawing much current, if the fridge compressor isn't kicking in and those sorts of things, this is actually going to indicate that you're 95 to 100%, but your state of charge in your van may be sitting down around 65-70%, and your voltage readings are significantly different. It's saying 13.8 volts, but even when our battery's at 100%, it's only reading at 13.5, 13.6 on the BMS app. So if you are running lithium in a van where the control panel has actually been designed for AGM batteries, make sure that you're downloading and familiarizing yourself with your BMS app. Now I use Smart BMS. That is the one that works for our Giant battery. Enerdrive Systems have an Enerdrive app. I'm not familiar with that many other lithium batteries. So thanks for watching through to the end, guys, but let me just summarize my tips on how to maximize your solar efficiency and your enjoyment while you're off grid. So number 1, make sure you understand your daily usage. That's really important when you're doing your calculations, to understand how much solar panels you need. Invest as much as you can in your batteries and your roof mounted and your soft solar panels. Number 2, and this is probably the most important one, get a decent quality 200 watt solar panel, soft solar panel. They're probably around $400, but to be really honest, guys, they weigh next to nothing. They're multi-uses, as you've seen with my setup. Plug into the van, plug into the regulator, into the battery on the car, or the auxiliary battery on the car. They're really, really super handy. Number 3, make sure you clean your solar panels on your roof. I do it every single time. And it's not even when you've been parked up under trees and there's birds pooping on and stuff like that. It's also when you're driving these dusty corrugated roads and all that dust sits on top of the panels. You get a bit of condensation and dew overnight. All of a sudden you've got a film of dirt sitting on top of your panels. Number 4, make sure you minimize the use of your 240 watt appliances. I'm not going to say go out and chuck them all out, but use it as least as possible. And this sort of one goes hand in hand. Only make sure you've got your inverter. Or number 5 is make sure that you've got your inverter only switched on when your 240 volt appliances are in use, and make sure you're switching them off. And then number 6, particularly when you're using lithium, use your battery management system app. Don't trust the solar panel don't trust the control panel in your van, because it is, in our instance anyways, been designed for AGM batteries as opposed to the lithium battery that we've got in this van. So guys, I hope that this video has been useful for you. Some of the things are pretty basic, but yeah, there's nothing worse than sitting around camp feeling like you've got to move your soft panel every 5 seconds, or you're only going to last 3 days and you've booked and paid for 7 days and those sorts of things. You don't want to leave a fridge full of food. You want your beers to be cold. So if you just pay a bit of attention to it, this is one of the things that you learn over time. And you're also going to have varying conditions where there's clouds, colder weather, warmer weather, you know, full sun and those sorts of things. So the more that you practice, the more that you commit to memory, and the more that you commit to learning about this stuff, the more enjoyment you're going to have off grid. So cheers guys, hope this one helped. make sure you drop as many questions into the comments on this video, or send us a direct message. We love getting that feedback, and we also love answering your questions. The only time we won't answer them is when we're off grid. So cheers guys, have a great one.